Good evening, Falmouth. I am Troy Clarkson, and I'm, as always, here with my good friend and our president of the Chamber of Commerce, Michael Kasparian, bringing you live election results here on FCTV. Michael and I have been doing this together for quite a while now, and it's been my pleasure to do this for many years, because tonight you will hear from the candidates, from Michael and me, and from local officials down at Town Hall. FCTV CEO Deb Rogers is down at Town Hall with Town Clerk Michael Palmer, and they will be bringing us election results live as soon as they come off the computer. So, Michael, welcome. As always, it's good to be with you, my friend.
Thank you, Troy. Always a pleasure to be here, too. Always an exciting time in Falmouth at election time, and part of that is because of this great coverage that we have by FCTV, as Troy said, down at Town Hall and here as well. So, pretty amazing. Yeah.
It is, and democracy is alive and well here in Falmouth. So tonight we'll talk about some of the races that are going on here. We have a contested race for Select Board.
Right.
We have a record-breaking race for a one-year term on the Select Board, and we'll talk about that in a minute. We do have a pretty hotly contested school committee race that's received a lot of attention here in town, and some other races as well. Of course, town meeting races in each precinct. And a planning board race that's uncontested, but also an important board, Michael, as you and I have been discussing affordable housing in town and those implications. The planning board is taking on more and more important projects and positions. So we're going to get through all of that tonight. We're going to break down those races. Let's start with the Select Board. Michael is getting his mic fixed up here. And he'll be ready to chat in just a minute. But, of course, the headliner, as it always is, the Select Board race, there are 2 seats open. So 9-year incumbent Doug Brown is facing 3 challenges. Of course, Scott Zelinski has decided not to run for a second term, so he will exit the board after only 3 years. But Colin Reed, James Morse, and Richard Dickey McAvoy are the challengers for this. So, Michael, let's talk about this race. It's been a very respectful race. I think the candidates all have something to offer. They all have something different to offer. And so let's talk about that race, because there are many important issues. Of course, affordable housing continues to be at the top, I think, of the discussion, but coastal resiliency, economic development, something that you've been heavily involved with, of course, over the years. So break down the race. What have you seen? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's very interesting that there's 4 people running for 2 seats. Now, of course, Doug is running as an incumbent. And the other thing I find interesting is that there are no women running for this seat. So that's the first time in a while. And you're right. The issues are complex. I think they've all taken a very holistic approach when they've talked about the issues. I think the candidates are well aware that things are dependent on each other, whether that's affordable housing, coastal resiliency, zoning changes that may be necessary to accommodate some of those things. And what I found in talking to the candidates is that they're very thoughtful and have done their homework. And I think that everybody really wants to serve from the right perspective. So I'm excited. It's going to be great to see. I think it's a great time for Falmouth. I think that all the candidates who are running are strong candidates, and that will enable the Select Board to be even stronger and do some good things going forward.
Agreed, and we will break down those candidates individually in a minute, but we're going to go right now to Debbie Rogers at Town Hall. Debbie, glad to have you there. Exciting here, another election night, and we're glad you're in front of the camera.
Good evening, Troy and Michael. It is very good to be with you tonight from Town Hall. Guess who's joining me already? I've got the man of the hour here.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Troy. How you doing?
Hello, Michael. Looking good.
How's it going here tonight?
It started out pretty slow, and I wasn't real optimistic about the turnout for this year. The early voting ballots coming back by mail and in person we're about 600 votes off from last year, and we hit 20% last year. But I think we saw some activities at the polls today, and we're creeping up on that 20%, which I'm real happy about, even though it's still only 20%. At least it's not 10%. So it looks like some people turned out at the polls today to inch that turnout back a little bit closer to the 20%, which is a good goal for a local election. You obviously like to do more, but I'm happy it's not 10%.
You know what I was really interested in? I was looking at the ballots that you have here at Town Hall on the wall. And while I know everybody is keeping an eye on the select board race and the school committee, I was interested to see that there's some competition in our precincts this year for town meeting seats.
Yeah, some of them, the precincts do have some competition. There are some that notoriously don't have competition, but yeah, that's always a good thing to do. And I see kind of a change in what's going on. I've noticed some younger people speaking at town meeting, and maybe they're becoming involved with in running for town meeting member, which would be a great thing. If we can bring up some of the Wacoit precinct 7, if we can get some people interested out there, we could really see some interest in running for town meeting. I'd be happy to see that.
Yeah, and I think that's what Michael and Troy are talking about, people getting more engaged, people running for the right reasons, people really wanting to get involved in the community.
Oh, absolutely, and I think it's a good thing to see. We put a lot of work into every election, and it's the same no matter what we do. So to get people out and get people on the ballot, it just makes it more interesting, more rewarding for us.
Yeah. Well, we're going to be calling on you as soon as you start getting some numbers. So thank you for your time.
Okay, shortly after 8, we should have at least the ballots that we pre-tabulated. So it's not quite it'll give us a snapshot, a quick snapshot. It'll be a little less than 50% of the total ballots, but it's a snapshot of what could possibly happen. Now that could change dramatically by the end of the night, but it's give you something to talk about at least.
Great, thank you.
All right,
Thanks for your time, Michael. Thanks, and I'm going to send it back to you, Troy and Michael.
Well, thanks, Debbie, and there is lots to talk about. We do have a guest, but before we get to that, I wanted, Michael, just briefly, because we've talked over the years about the turnout and about how turnout is very different in different neighborhoods and precincts in town. So it's going to be very interesting to see with that 20% turnout if the other villages, particularly those on the east side of town, can break that barrier and increase that turnout. Because as we've talked about, and as consistently happens, Precinct 1, which is largely Woods Hole and parts of Sipowicit, and Precinct 5, which is mainly North Falmouth, a little bit of West Falmouth, generally have a much higher turnout than the rest of the town, and have in many races determined who the successful candidates are going to be. Sure. So that's something to watch, folks, tonight as we see those results. It's not just the overall results, but it's about how those precinct by precinct results drive the overall result. So Michael Palmer, the town clerk, talked about young people getting involved and his excitement about younger people standing up and stepping up and getting involved. So tonight, we have here in the studio with us a record-breaking young person. I'm going to go out on a limb and make a bold prediction that Jack Richardson will successfully be elected to the select board tonight.
Oh, how do you like that?
And with that, he will become the youngest select board member elected in the more than 300-year history of our community. So first, Jack, welcome, but second,
Thank you, Troy.
A warm congratulations to you.
Thank you.
It's pretty amazing.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, it's great to be here, and thank you, Falmouth, thank you, FCTV, for having me. Yeah, it's an honor. When the one-year term opened up, I figured, I spent the last year and a half knocking doors for our Senator Dylan Fernandez and Representative Thomas Moakley. And every door I knocked before I could get a word out, it was, oh, great, a young person. So when you hear that, 3,000 times, it's time for some new generation to step up. So I'm excited, difficult times, but exciting times ahead with a lot of opportunity happening here in Falmouth. And I look forward to offering a new perspective than we've traditionally had.
Yeah, You know, the rumor is that even though Troy's giving up the hat of being the youngest, he's going to keep the mantle of being the best looking member of the select board ever elected, right, Troy? There you go. But I have to tell you, from my perspective, it's really exciting for me. Because, you know, I've known you, you went to school with my kids, so you truly are the next generation to me. And having kids in your generation and having a feel a little bit about how you think, I couldn't be more happy. And I think it's wonderful for one generation to welcome and turn over eventually the reins to the next generation. I love how your generation thinks, how thoughtful you are, how you have this worldwide approach, and I welcome it. I think it's amazing, and I know you're going to do great things.
Thank you.
It's excellent.
Thank you.
Really
yeah,
excellent.
and you know, on that one thing, you know, I've been hosting, you know, 6 or 7 house parties, you know, over the last couple months to really hear what people are seeing, and I really appreciate how perceptive and open everyone's been. You know, there's this perception that with local politics and town government that people can be kind of stuck to their roots and what they believe in. But I found there to be a lot of really good discussions and people open to different ideas than I would have thought. So it's been a really wonderful experience, and I'm looking forward to continuing that.
What are your initial thoughts? Have you been out to these parties, talking to people? Of course, you went into the race with an idea of what you might want to change. What has come out to the forefront do you think is the most important thing?
Not going to shock anyone, but it's housing. Housing over and over again, you know. It's not just my generation, but, you know, the generation older than me, really priced out of the market. And, you know, people, we've had a lot of great, you know, promises, and, you know, the Assembly delegates just had their resolution. Dan Gesson, Falmouth delegate, headed that. But, you know, we really need some action on it, and that's really what people are saying, is that housing is their biggest issue. That's one, and then water comes with that. You can't build new housing without improving our water. I voted yes on question 1. Happy to say that. I think that a plan moving to sewering is the right plan for Falmouth. But yeah, housing is the biggest issue by far, talking to people, because it's our schools, it's our police department, our fire department. You know, we've built beautiful brand new fire station, and we're struggling to staff it. So we need to look at, you know, I'm a big fan of workforce housing. You know, in my role with Representative Moakley's campaign, we attended a ribbon cutting of Navigator Homes in Martha's Vineyard, which is a green living space for seniors. And on the property, there's 19 units of housing for nurses who are going to be there. And that's the kind of bold initiatives that I think we should be looking to do here in Falmouth.
So let's talk a little bit more about that, Jack, because some have criticized the current board, and I've been among them, that they've gotten bogged down over the last couple of years in sort of the minutia of government. And I have said, both publicly and in my column, who gets married at Surf Drive Beach, while important, is probably not the best use of the time of the select board. But talk to us, because I know you put a lot of thought into this, specifically, what kind of initiatives will you bring to the board to make a dent in that housing issue?
And I will say that I think the board has made some positive steps. You know, in town meeting, we voted to make an independent board to handle the liquor licenses. You know, that's something that's going to clear up the agenda a bit. So I just finished serving my term on the Falmouth Housing Authority. And, you know, we really need to look at how can we renovate and repurpose homes, because like I mentioned with wastewater, we don't want to overdevelop, and then you lead to nobody gets happy with, you know, urban sprawl. And what really makes Cape Cod and Falmouth particularly unique is you know, our beauty and our nature. So solutions that protect that aspect. You know, the city of Boston just announced they're doing a pilot program where they'll cover the 10% zero interest loan if 2 families come together to buy a single family home. Solutions like that, which are something we can do, I want to look into. But above all that is, this town has really changed, you know, post-COVID, with the amount of wealth that has entered town. And I don't think, you know, these hedge fund managers who are buying homes in house, I don't think they're paying their fair share. I think we need to take a serious look on how we can capitalize off that revenue base, because they're not renting out their houses. They're not staying for more than a weekend, if that. And like I mentioned, we don't have the room to build new areas. And everywhere across town, we're seeing these McMansions be built in neighborhoods that are, you know, pretty residential year-round folks, and we really need to take a serious a look at it on how can we capitalize off this revenue base.
Excellent. And let's go back to the issue of youth, because I think it's important, and you carry that mantle now for your generation in town. And I should mention for the folks at home that perhaps don't know, the record that Jack is breaking tonight is mine. It was 32 years ago that I was elected to the select board at the age of 24, and I'm not 24 anymore. But talk to us, Jack, about what that means to you to really carry that mantle and represent your generation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a responsibility that I don't take lightly. I hope to be a beacon to bring in more youth into government. I was encouraged the last couple of town meetings. We've seen more and more folks from across the precincts, not necessarily just, you associate a precinct 1 is usually like that, but really across town of younger folks getting involved in town meeting. And I hope that more and more folks run for, as I said, there's plenty of open seats tonight. That's just the way it works. I hope more people get involved. But most importantly, I want to listen to people of my generation, because our values and our ideas are incredibly important. And when it comes to climate change, affordability, that's my generation's going to bear the brunt of that. With the outlook on climate change and parts of town that are at risk. So yeah, it's important to me, and I really hope to deliver, not just for my generation, but for the town of Falmouth. And I think it's a responsibility for me to be true to my values and to be bold, because I think when people say they want a new generation, it comes in cycles. We usually routinely want a new generation. I'm sure they're saying that when you broke the record. So I think that comes as I think all solutions have to be on the table, and I'm ready to take bold and maybe unpopular at the time stances if that's what it takes.
So I think one of the things that we've seen is when the select board collaborates, when you have 5 members that are working together, listening to each other and coming up with solutions, that's when everything moves forward. So how do you feel about that, being younger? How do you feel, I know you said you're going to listen, how do you feel about working with 4 other people, and how do you see that moving forward?
I'm really excited. I've gotten coffee with Bob Pascali, Heather Goldstone, and Doug Brown, and I'm really, really looking forward to, this is a board. I think we're going to have a lot of collaboration. I think we're really aligned with how we want to change the, Troy kind of mentioned, these agendas, make them really more issue oriented. So, if you have someone who's coming from Conservation Committee, let's make that meeting about environment and land and space and open space, and not, have someone who spent months working on something come for 5 minutes and then sit there for something that isn't related. So really doing more to make sure that our meetings are more, 1, goal oriented, and 2, have a purpose. But yeah, I was really excited with the conversations I've had with Bob and Heather, and whoever else wins tonight. I look forward to working with them as well.
Awesome. So I'm curious, one more question for you. It's kind of interesting. We have 4 people running for the 3-year term. You chose the 1-year term. So was that, you're going to put your toe in the water and see how it goes, or was there something deliberate for that?
Yeah, 2 parts of that. One, when I pulled papers, there were already 4 people running, and I'm an election consultant first, so I was like, all right, I'll take my chances with the 1-year seat. And then beyond that, I just think it's a perfect amount of time for me where I am in my career. I'm just starting. I'm in 5 months now working at the State House for Senator Fernandez. So I think it's just a good time for me in my career. To be open and transparent, I do not know if I'll run in a year from now. We'll see. But I'm really excited for this next year ahead, and I think we can accomplish a lot in a relatively small amount of time in context of it all.
Well, your skills paid off. You won.
I guess so.
That's excellent, right?
Absolutely. So one more question, Jack. Because you talked about, for instance, when the Conservation Commission comes in, and really transcending that from a simple visit to a substantive policy discussion. And in the charter, the main goal or the main role of the select board is to recommend major courses of action. Mm-hmm. I think those are the words, and to set policy. So it sounds to me like you are focused on staying true to that overall mission. Mm-hmm. How do you do that?
Yeah, I think that one question, and I said this when I got coffee with Bob the other day, is I think the one question I'm going to ask after is, what do you want us to do? because a lot of times is you have these recommendations and then it's, okay, great, thank you. And then we don't see them again for 2 or 3 years. My question is, what do you want me to do? And really, going with our strategic plan that the town manager and the town have done a great job preparing for. And really saying what do you want the select board to do, whether it be a vote or action we take to further these initiatives. Because, we have an incredibly talented volunteer committee. I know you've wrote on this sometimes as they felt disrespected, and I really want to change that culture. And I look forward to, really pushing forward with solutions and recommendations that people give to the board.
Excellent.
Outstanding.
Yeah,
Well,
it's great.
let us be the first to officially congratulate
Thank you both.
If I had a baton here in my hand, I would pass it to you, Jack, but I am profoundly grateful to be among the first to congratulate you and to wish you the best of luck. But I think most importantly, to thank you for being willing to put the time in and really, as I said before, carry that mantle.
Thank you, Troy. I really appreciate it.
Congratulations.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
excellent.
I appreciate it. Thank you both.
So again, our first bold prediction, that's Jack Richardson, who I predict is going to sail to a momentous victory in his race for the select board tonight. And I'm guessing Michael Palmer would agree with us. And speaking of our town clerk, we do have a pre-taped package that Michael provided to the folks here at FCTV earlier today. So let's hear from the town clerk.
Can you introduce yourself for those who may not know you and talk a little bit about what the job of town clerk entails?
Okay. I am Michael Palmer, and I have been the town clerk for the past 22 years. The town clerk's office is kind of the hub of town hall, as it's called, and we handle a lot of different functions. Obviously, during this time of year, we're very busy with election functions taking place, and early voting has become a big part of that, so we're involved in the early voting time period before the annual town election. But we're also deal with town meeting, recording the votes of town meeting. We deal with recording and registering vital records, which means the births, deaths, and marriages in the town of Falmouth. We also register people to vote and maintain those voting lists for the town. A lot of different things we do. We juggle a lot of things. We've recently taken up the chore of issuing beach and dump stickers and shellfish permits, which has added a lot of time to our day in the town clerk's office. We're also responsible for recording the documents and votes of the different committees. So when the planning board or the zoning board make a decision, or the board of selectmen make a decision, they're filing those decisions with the town clerk's office, and then we are able to issue certified copies of those decisions in the future when people are looking for them. So we handle quite a few different things, but that kind of is a summary of some of the things we do.
You were planning on retiring this year, I heard, but you reversed that decision 1 week after that original announcement. What made you change your mind?
Yeah. So I said I've been the town clerk for 22 years. I am 68 years old. And I announced my retirement, and when I came back to the office after the weekend, I believe, another person in the office had accepted a job with the town clerk in Bourne as the assistant town clerk in the town of Bourne. The assistant town clerk in our office was also planning on retiring, Lori Robbins. That would have left one person in the office with a newly elected town clerk. I didn't think that was right. I've lived here all my life, and I've been the town clerk, I said for 22 years. To turn over that office with not really in a functioning position to somebody that's brand new, if they had the staff still present, and a town clerk that was brand new could pick up where I left off. But because there was only one staff person left, I just didn't feel comfortable doing that.
Well, that's amazing, as always. Michael Palmer doing an excellent job. And it's good to see that he's back in, and we've got him for a couple more years, so it's wonderful.
Not just because Michael and I have been friends for many years, but based on my experience in local government in Massachusetts outside of Falmouth, Michael is highly regarded as one of the finest town clerks in the Commonwealth. And year after year, with all of the discussions and histrionics about election safety nationwide, we run some of the finest elections around because Mike Palmer is a real pro.
Well, he's a calming voice, isn't he? Just listening to him when he talks about the whole process and everything, and even earlier when he was talking about how excited he was, we had almost 20% turnout, it wasn't 10. He's always the optimist in the room, and I think that that has really, contributed to his success. Yeah, wonderful.
No question, and I'm glad that he's sticking around for another term because I think we need that stability in our local elections and need to have confidence in our local elections. And I know FCTV had another discussion with Michael that we'll play a little bit later in this broadcast where he'll tell a fun story about how I got started in local politics and it involves him. So let's go back, Michael. Before Jack came on, we were talking about that select board race with 4 candidates for 2 slots. And we will have Doug Brown on a Zoom in just a few minutes, and we'll get a good chance to talk to him. But I think Doug's a good lead-in interview for us because I think I would be surprised, and lots of folks would be surprised if he didn't top the ticket tonight, right? He was put 9 years in the job.
Right.
Doug's the kind of guy that shows up. He does his homework. He's generally nonpartisan. The office itself is nonpartisan, and Doug stays pretty true to that. And he's issues-based and has worked very hard over the last 9 years. And prior to that, he put in time on the planning board. And I think he's earned the right to stay for another 3 years. But
no question. I mean, when I look at it, I think, like a lot of people also view it as Doug will win re-election, and the other 3 candidates will be competing for that one other seat. I would be shocked if it went any other way. In my role as president of the chamber, I've had the benefit of working with him all those years as well. I've always found him so approachable, willing to listen, and what I like about Doug is that he thinks things through and he's not afraid to change his mind after he gets more information. So that kind of calmness and stability, like you were talking about with Michael Palmer, that's going to be another anchor going forward, I think, because I know we'll talk as the program goes through a little bit more about some of the issues facing the town, some of the issues that are important to voters. These can be tumultuous times coming up, and we're going to need strong sense of security and experience, I think, goes a long way. So I think it's going to be good, and I agree with you 100%.
no question. The issues, for instance, that we were discussing with Jack, those aren't simple issues with simple solutions. And so the select board, more than ever, is going to have to take, in some cases, difficult policy positions. I mean, there was an issue that I'm actually writing about this week related to zoning and whether or not we zone for smaller lots to address some of those affordable housing issues. And for some in town, that's a really good idea, and others not so much.
Absolutely.
And so the board's going to have to take what in some circles will be difficult positions to be able to make measurable change in some of those issues.
Look, absolutely, and for someone who spends a lot of time talking about housing, working on housing, it's all interrelated, right? You can't build housing without addressing zoning, and you can't address zoning until you address wastewater. So again, like he said, question 1, sewering helps. And it's not to the point where you're going to build density throughout the entire town, but there will be certain areas that it makes sense to go more dense, and that would require rezoning. I mean, one of the issues we've talked about over and over again, which I always found very peculiar when I moved here, was the lack of multifamily housing. Growing up in Providence, many of us, the first house we bought, I bought a multifamily house. So not only does that provide a young family or anyone the opportunity to own a house, but it also provides someone who may need to rent or want to rent housing. And of course, that's density. That's 2 households on 1 lot. So things like that, I think, people have talked about, but it takes bold measures to make that happen, and you have to have that conversation at the very top level.
So I think here in Falmouth, maybe the 2020s version of that, what you described back in Providence, is the emergence of the accessory dwelling units, the ADUs as they're commonly called. And so to me, relaxing some of the zoning, and the town the planning board, supported by town meeting, and in some cases led by the select board, have done a good job at making some progress on that.
And again, you know, you talk to a lot of people, people have different ideas. They're against 40B, they're for 40B. Look, the bottom line in housing is really pretty simple. When supply meets demand, prices, you know, level off. When the supply is so low, that's why prices are sky high. And so until you get more available units on the market, you're never going to get, you know, the amount of rent down to that you need for people who need to rent or want to rent. So I mean, it's a huge issue. I'm glad to see him talking about that. And you know, again, going forward, we have to work collectively on this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it is 8 o'clock and the polls have closed. So like they do on CNN, we're going to predict our first winner is Jack Richardson.
Nice.
Elected to a 1-year unexpired term on the select board. Congratulations on that record-setting victory.
Unseating Troy here as the youngest member of the select board ever elected. How do you like that?
And also, speaking of Doug Brown, we're very thrilled to have Doug Brown on Zoom here. So we'll let's go to that and say hello to Doug Brown.
Hello, Doug.
Hi guys, how are you?
We're good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Excellent. Got a big smile on your face.
Yeah, hey, it's a good day.
Yes,
I'm
it
out
is.
here behind Jack's at the restaurant in the back parking lot. I didn't want to leave my guests. So.
Okay.
Excellent.
Yeah, no,
Well,
no problem. That's great.
That's okay. That's some of the best pizza in town, so you chose wisely there. So,
Yes, sir.
Doug, we were just chatting before you came on and honoring your 9 years of service and the fact that you do your homework and you show up and you're engaged and a lot of people look very favorably on that. So how's it been out there? Has that been the reception that you've received?
It's the reception I've received from all the folks I've talked to, but geez, it just doesn't seem like a lot of folks are really excited about today's election, which is a little concerning. So I hope there's more voters than I'm thinking, but it seems like a slow day.
Michael Palmer was predicting possibly 20%, maybe a little bit under than that. So,
Well, I guess that's respectable at least.
yeah.
Yeah, so 20% is around a little higher than normal. The political pundit in me says, Doug, that a higher turnout benefits the incumbent, and I think that means good things for you. So let's just assume that you're going to be victorious tonight. Michael and I certainly think so. Talk to us
All right.
about the next 3 years and what are the priorities. There's going to have a reshaped board. How do you plan to move forward?
Well, first for me, it's going to be all about the budget and all the 10-year capital improvement plan is huge at $750 million plus. So we're going to really have to think about whether or not we can afford all the things that are in the 10-year plan, or if it's going to maybe some of that's going to have to get pushed out to a 15-year, maybe even a 20-year. Maybe some of it's going to have to come off the table if it's not something essential. We're going to have a deficit for the school. You know, they've already spent their reserve funds. So they're probably going to need another couple of $1 million to replenish their reserves. Plus, who knows what the cuts to the Department of Education are going to imply for them. So we might have to help them even more. I wouldn't be surprised if we have to come up with $3 to $5 million for them.
Oh, well, that's well. It's good to have your leadership back on the board. Both Troy and I, again, predicted that you will be reelected, and so best of luck to you. We're going to find out really soon.
Thanks
Yeah,
so
we
much,
are.
Doug. We appreciate it, and best of luck to you.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
So we'll go for another package. The folks here at FCTV were out at the precincts talking to voters today. So let's hear what they had to say.
When voting, what are some of the most important issues you consider when selecting a candidate?
So the way that I pick a candidate is that it's the folks that I grew up with, people I went to high school with that are now selectmen or candidates, and I kind of know they have an allegiance to the town.
For me, it's understanding the issues in a small town.
I think it's time to put younger people in charge of things because older people just don't seem to be doing the job.
Their honesty and their integrity.
Well, certainly their experience and their willingness to listen, to compromise when necessary, and just to educate themselves on issues that they may not know right off the top.
I think some of the most important issues in the town of Falmouth today, of course, are the school committee vote, and also making sure we have candidates across all boards and offices that are invested. The environment is very important to me as well, and the land that we have here and our water and how we're taking care and protecting those things.
Their support for affordable housing is topmost when I'm thinking of what the town needs supporters for. And also, I work in conservation, so open space conservation, really important.
I actually try to get to know in person the candidates, which in fact I do.
The big issue that I'm thinking about this year is, candidates that support improvement of the water quality in our estuaries.
Why is voting important?
Particularly in light of what's going on in Washington. A lot more burden's going to fall here, and I want to make sure we got the right people in charge.
We can vote for anybody in D.C., but real democracy starts here.
I think my generation, and I'm a lot older than most here, it's always been important. I've seen the difference it made through some, different presidential elections and how countries can shift and how small towns can shift. And I think it's vital, no matter what, to just get out and vote.
Just look at the last election, presidential election I'm talking about. That'll tell you everything you need to know about how important it is to vote and research what you're voting for. Don't just listen to sound bites on television.
Well, we can't complain if we don't come out and vote and let people know how we feel about certain issues. So if we're going to complain, and people love to complain, you've got to be able to go to vote and make your positions heard.
Voting's important because we live in a country that's premised, I think, very well on the idea that people can govern themselves. And if we don't participate in that process, what's the point? And I happen to feel that local politics is where people can really make a difference.
Thank you, and we're back. And thanks to those citizens for taking the time not only to go out and vote, but to share their thoughts with all of us here on FCTV. And the last speaker talked about making a difference. So we now are very fortunate to have someone here in the studio who's also trying to make a difference. We want to welcome one of the candidates for Select Board, Richard Dickey McAvoy. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks
welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Yes.
And wearing that spectacular Chamber of Commerce necktie. I love that.
Yes. Well, the Richard Dickey thing was, everyone knows me as Dickey.
Okay.
But they wouldn't let me put that on the ballot. So I had to put a sign so people could connect the dots there. So.
Absolutely. Well, we're very glad to have you step up and to take that step to go before the voters. It's so important. You come from what I could call a legendary family here in town. I think anyone between the ages of 40 and 70 knows a McAvoy, and I was actually proud to know both of your parents pretty well and spent a lot of time at the Beef and Deli. So talk to us about why this is important to you. Why now?
Well, getting older, been in town my whole life. I've always loved this place, and I just wanted to do something more. I wanted to be more involved in the town. Eventually, I think a lot of us do, right? We change, and I kind of want to leave it the way it was for the next generation. So I see a lot of things that, particularly the one thing that really is a bugaboo for me is those giant buildings on Main Street. I just don't like them. And they're right up against now the street. Some of the ones that were farther set back, okay, like maybe that old nursing home that no one's in, but it's set back, right? You don't really notice it. But these buildings are there. Personally, I just think they're monoliths. I don't think we should see them in Falmouth. So that was what really got my button. But now, actually, it's been really fun and humbling too. Like going out, getting the signatures, finding people actually support you and like you, and then they're willing to help you. It's really been really fantastic. It's been a great experience. So, and then I get to learn all these things about the town, how it works. I have to study, going back to school almost, right? I'm going in and looking at old meetings and documents and all this stuff, looking at the budget line items, all that stuff that I was never involved, right? So how would I know? But it's been really fun getting to know it, and I hope I get to do it for 3 years. It's been great.
Any surprises, once you started talking to people? I know you mentioned the buildings on Main Street, housing, but any other surprises which you have found to be important to people that maybe are going to get you to think in a certain way?
Yeah, actually a few things. The one thing is, I don't know, I must just come around and say it. So, this question one, it never words the 70-30. Essentially, we're trying to fund the 30, but there's nothing about the 70. So those people are about, I think they don't realize they're voting that they're going to have to pay $35,000 for sewer. I don't think they know that, because it doesn't say that in the and as I started educating myself and learning all these things, like, oh, the 70-30, I didn't even know the 70-30 rule until like a few months ago. But yeah, now those things, I don't know, one after another, and they're all tied together. And of course, I know people that, I do a lot of athletics, so I'm working with a lot of younger people and even running with the younger people, so I get to talk to them all the time, and a lot of them working Woods Hole and stuff, and they were talking about, they're having a hard time getting a place to live. So of course, there's that, but everything's tied together, and it's like this balancing act that we're going to have to do, right? To do it's going to be, so I don't know, I guess I want to be involved and make sure it doesn't, because I haven't really liked the way it's been going so far, so I just want to be involved and hope,
Great.
Everyone else wants me to be.
Well, we are very appreciative of you taking the plunge and putting yourself out there. Michael and I both know we've been in the public eye for a long time. It's not easy, so thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And we really appreciate you coming in here, studio, and talking to us tonight.
Yeah.
We
Best
do
of
now
luck.
have another visit with Town Clerk Michael Palmer to talk about voter turnout.
Last year's presidential election, just over 22,000 votes were cast in Falmouth, and for the 2024 town election, unofficial results list a turnout of just under 6,000 voters. So that's about a 20% turnout for local elections versus 77% for the last presidential election. Is that kind of the norm for Falmouth?
That is the norm, and it's the norm across the country. Unfortunately, local elections, and for a local election, these are your neighbors. These are people, your family, your friends that are running for these offices. You see them. You see them at church. You see them at the supermarket. You can hold conversations with them, but people just don't come out and vote. Unfortunately, there's you don't have a lot of advertising like for a presidential election. There's a lot more. You're just inundated with ads on TV and ads in newspapers and mail. You don't see that for a local election. So are people not aware of an election, or they're not aware of who's running? I'm not sure what the answer to that is. But your select board, you can call them up and they'll actually talk to you about the issues that you're having, and they're really making decisions in town meeting on spending your real estate taxes. So it's real important, and I just can't figure out why we don't get larger turnouts for local elections. It just boggles me. You do what you can to try to get people to turn out, but bottom line, they have to make a commitment to come out and vote.
My insider said it was okay not to rush.
And again, thank you to Town Clerk Michael Palmer for always imparting his wisdom on us and his experience as the chief election official here in Falmouth. So we have another guest in studio. We're happy to have another candidate for the Select Board, Colin Reed. Colin, welcome. We're glad to have you here live on FCTV.
It's great to be here. It's election day. It's exciting.
Yes, it is. So we'll go right into
All
it.
right.
Tell us, how's it been out there? What's going on? What have you seen? How do you feel?
I feel great. Seen a pretty good turnout today, standing on the street corners and on the high school corners. It's great to see the turnout, the people rolling by, the people honking, the people in support. It's been a fun day. It's the first time I've ever experienced it. So, yeah, definitely exciting day.
Yeah. Has it been a fun experience altogether since you jumped in?
Yeah, I think, what Dickie just said, it's a learning experience, right? Since jumping in, you know the issues that you have to tackle and that you have to think very strategically about. But hearing the different stories, putting yourself in other people's shoes, it was really a learning experience to understand really the complexity of what this job requires.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to stop you for 1 second, but you can stay here in
Yep.
studio with us. We're going to get the first results live from Town Hall. Well, Debbie, take it away.
To cut you off, Colin, but we have some pre-results here with Michael Palmer, and we wanted to get you those as quickly as we could.
Okay, these are very preliminary results. These are ballots that we pre-tabulated that were cut off on Friday night. So we still have all the ballots that came in on Saturday, all the ballots came in on Sunday, Monday, and all the ballots that were by mail that came in today. So there's still a lot of votes to be added to this, but just some of the things to talk about. It looks like for the selectmen, Colin Reed and Doug Brown. Doug Brown had 1,600 and Colin Reed had 1,077. So it looks like they were pretty far ahead of the other two candidates. So that's kind of interesting. And of course, I got more votes than all of them, so that's pretty interesting too. But
Nobody doubted that,
For
Michael.
the school committee, it looks like the incumbents kind of stayed off the challenges. They look like they were on the top, at least for the early voting ballots. They're still the top three vote getters for school committee. So that's obviously more to come, and it could drastically change by the end of the night, but something interesting to talk about. And the only other one the question. So on question one, which is the sewer question, overwhelmingly passed by 1,400 votes to 400. And then the question two, the same thing, 1,800 to 200. So that question overwhelmingly passed. The only other results, I do have results from just precinct one, which, as you all know, is kind of always has the highest turnouts and kind of sometimes dictates where the town is going. So again, with the Board of Selectmen, Colin Reed and Doug Brown came in with the most votes of approximately 400 votes apiece, and then the other two off with 100 or just under 100 votes. So, and then for school committee, it looks like Margaret Souza, Jane Scarborough, and Melissa Keefe look like they had the majority of the votes in precinct one. For the questions in precinct one, again, pretty much overwhelming on question one, 419 and 120 no's, and the ballot question for the non-binding resolution was overwhelming too, 477 to 52. So interesting results, but we have a long way to go. So something to talk about, give people something to talk about. But as we all know, we could be winning in Troy in 7 precincts, and then that one precinct will come in and you go home crying. So we'll see how the night progresses, and we'll talk to you again.
Great, thanks, Michael.
Great. All
Thanks,
right.
and we'll be back as soon as we have some more
Thank you
results.
very much.
Thank
All right.
you very,
so
very much.
From right there, from the pre-voting and precinct one results, both you and Doug Brown have garnered the most votes so far by a pretty wide margin in precinct one. So assuming you go ahead and take the night, it would be the opportunity for you to make some changes. And what do you see? What's the important thing you'd like to tackle if you're given the honor of that seat?
Well, first, before we get into that, I just want to say thank you to Mr. Palmer and his entire team and the team of volunteers that make these elections happen. Without them, we wouldn't be where we are today. I wouldn't be in this seat. So thank you to everybody. To answer your question directly, I think we have my saying was stick to the basics. What are the 3 basics? Well, we know we need housing. We know we need zoning. We know we need wastewater. Let's start there. Those are the urgent and the important things that we need to tackle right now as a team. And we also need to plan for the future as well. We've talked about coastal resiliency. We've talked about the effects of the changing climate and what's happening in the ocean. So we have to work on that, but that's a planning routine that we have to do collectively as a town. So I would start with those 4, knowing that there's business as usual that we have to continue to do.
Yeah.
So these results, Colin, or as Michael and I had predicted for Precinct 1, and we knew that Doug would have a strong showing as an incumbent, but with a large lead in Precinct 1 and coming in a strong second for the early voting, that bodes very well for you. So what Michael was referencing was my first run when I was ahead after all of the precincts, and then Precinct 1 came in, and I lost so badly I lost the election. But that is not your fate. So you've turned the table on that. But talk to us about the campaign in general, what it's meant to get out there. You've been here in town for a decade now, volunteered with the Chamber and, of course, the EDIC, but this is really broadening your scope. And what have you found as you've been out there talking to people?
There's a huge passion for Falmouth and seeing Falmouth succeed. Now, there's different takes on that, of course. There are many special interests. There are many different points of view. I think being on the campaign trail and listening as much as I did over coffee, over meet and greets, you truly learn a better appreciation for those perspectives. And at the end of the day, when you start boiling things down, you see that there's a lot of similarity than there are differences. In town, our job is to provide the basic essential services to everybody. And, you know, when you talk about these important issues, like housing, like wastewater, like zoning, you realize there's a lot of commonality there and there's a lot of shared need, and we just need to go after that. And I think to answer your question more directly, it was a huge learning experience just to learn different perspectives from different walks of life. And I think that was a really important thing for me. I went in with some ideas, but I think they really were expanded.
Excellent.
Well, excellent.
Well, we got to
All
get
right.
back to Town Hall, Colin, so thank you very much. We really appreciate your efforts and your willingness to put yourself out there for election, and no matter the result tonight, you have our gratitude.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who voted. It's very important.
Okay, our folks here at FCTV were also discussing with voters today the importance of that act of voting. So let's hear from some more from them.
Why do you think it's important to vote?
Well, you know, a lot of people have given their life for me to be able to have the freedom to do it. And, you know, Kennedy asked not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And being elderly and not, you know, being disabled, the most I can do is come out and vote and have my say that way. So, you know, that's my God-given right, and I'm going to take advantage of it.
My civic duty. And I'd like to continue to see the town function properly and prosper, and I'd like to vote to help do that.
And was there one particular issue?
No, I don't think so. I thought the contested races and the questions were both important.
What about the questions?
I'm really I know it was not binding or anything, the vote about the Pilgrim nuclear plant, but I'm very concerned about that, and I would also like to see progress on the sewering in town.
I just think that this is our community, this is our town, and we need to support and be part of the decision process and who we put in decision-making positions. You know, we are a very close community, and it's important that we all take ownership of what goes on in the town, because you can't complain about it or piss and moan about it if you don't vote and say your piece.
Any particular issue or candidate that you came out to support today?
Colin Reed.
For select board?
Yep.
I always vote. Always vote, every situation.
And why is that?
because I think it's necessary to get the right people in the right positions to run the town appropriately, and the government.
Was there one particular candidate that you came, or issue that you came out to support today?
Well, there are a couple of issues and a couple of candidates, yes.
And what about the ballot questions? Do you have any position on the ballot questions?
I'll tell you what I voted. I voted yes for both of them.
Okay.
Okay.
We
Interesting.
are back. And speaking of the ballot questions, let's talk about those a little bit, Michael. So
Sure.
obviously question one, and you were talking earlier tonight about the importance of sewering and public utilities and how important that is for growth and providing those solutions and addressing the nitrogen issues in our estuaries. So we have it up on the screen there. The question one is to raise funds outside the limits of Proposition 2.5 to pay for the Great Pond Phase 1 sewer project. And this is, of course, just the latest sewer expansion that the town has sponsored. Your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are, which I truly believe, that we need to sewer and sewer as much as we can. And how we get there, of course, depends on how it's going to be funded, but there has to be a very proactive and thoughtful plan on how that gets done. I like how we're attacking the estuaries and the areas that are really most harmed by the nitrogen load and working our way back. So I think it's totally necessary. Of course, growing up in a community where everything was sewered, I remember we moved here and we purchased our home, and the home failed this Title V septic, and I was confused about that, and I didn't know, and I've learned along the way. And that would be something that we wouldn't have to deal with. And of course, you know, the more we sewer, but then of course what it does is it allows for density. It allows us to provide more housing. So I'm not surprised. I think this will pass by a big majority. I think we've been talking about it long enough, and people understand how it's connected to everything. And like one of the people said in there that this is a very tight-knit community, and I think people want to help their neighbors, you know, better their situation. So yeah.
So true. So if you're just tuning in, quick update. Doug Brown and Colin Reed are out to early leads for the Select Board race with Precinct 1 and the early voting results in. The incumbents in the school committee race were making a strong showing, but Jane Scarborough, one of the challengers, also pulled a strong vote in Precinct 1, so that's a pretty tight race there. Let's talk about that school committee race right here. So we do have, Michael, those three incumbents, Michael Halen, Margaret Souza, and Melissa Keefe, challenged by Jane Scarborough, Sarah Bogdan, and Amanda McGonigal. Something interesting in that race you don't see too often, Bogdan and McGonigal actually ran as a team. So it'll be interesting to see how that impacts their success and their voting numbers. There are definitely clear lines of philosophy in this school committee race, and some of the folks actually lining up with one another. And a lot of it had to do with the superintendent's plan to rework some of the schools.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And I know the people that I had spoken to, like you said, have very specific ideas, one way or another. And so I think it's interesting to see that the incumbents are ahead at this point, which I think, you know, indicates a desire to kind of stay the course, maybe support what the school committee's done so far, what the schools are doing. It is very interesting that you had a tag team, if you will, too, and it would be even more interesting to see if one of the two was elected, and then to see where it goes. But I think the important thing about this race, which I appreciated the most, was the conversation that came from it and the different ideas and perspectives. So I hope people took time to really digest everyone's perspective, and we're going to see how it ends up.
You know, that's an excellent point, because whatever your philosophy is, whomever you support, the fact that the candidates get out there, both for the school committee and the select board, and had a very respectful and robust discussion about the issues,
right,
I think really speaks well of democracy here in Falmouth.
And if I had to add, you know, I would look at the difference between the select board race and this race. Both were done very professionally, I agree. I think that the candidates running for select board all touched about the same issues, kind of had the same ideas, give or take, but there wasn't a far departure from each other. Where on the school committee race, there were some very different ideas, different thoughts that were talked about, debated, in print, in public, and again, I hope people paid attention and they voted according to what they feel will be the best for the schools.
Agreed, and you know, that's an issue I wrote about in my column several weeks ago, and I think I applaud the superintendent for having the foresight to bring those issues forward. The enrollment is down. We need to take a look at the reuse of some of those buildings. Michael, you and I have been talking about that.
Listen,
for
no
years.
question. I understand. I was actually shocked a little bit myself at the pushback. I thought that the conversation should have continued longer. Maybe that specific plan wouldn't have been the end plan, but let's face it, Doug just talked about one of the issues he wants to tackle is the shortfall in the school budget. You've got the population going down. You've got buildings that need maintenance going forward. Meanwhile, can there be a adaptive reuse for maybe one or two of those buildings? I don't know. But the whole thing is that we need a school committee that's going to be thinking ahead and going to pivot and think about where are we going to be 10 years from now, 20 years from now, because the trend is going down in population. Of course, it's all tied into high housing, which we've been talked about as well. So it's big picture issues here.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Well,
that'd be
speaking of the
great.
school committee race, we're going to run to town hall. One of the school committee incumbents is there live with Debbie Rogers. So let's say hello to Melissa Keefe.
So we are here at Town Hall, and thank you for joining us, Melissa.
Thanks for having me, Deb.
So we were just looking over the very, very preliminary results that Michael had handed us earlier, which has you in second place right now. Talk to us about, your involvement in the schools. What led you to not only want to do this, but to do it again?
In the beginning, what led me? I just thought I'm ready to give back. I'm from here. We had little kids at the time. I was had held multiple officer positions at the East Falmouth PTO. And at the time, I worked 2 days during the work week, and my other shift was on the weekend. So I had lots of time during the week to get things done when the kids were at school. Life changes. I now work 4 days during the work week, and I have every weekend off, which is great for them and for all of us. And I still feel like I have service to give. I'm not quite done yet. There's a few projects that I'd like to see through, and my kids are almost done with high school, and I would like to see them through as well from this perspective, I guess.
So in terms of, there's obviously a lot going on in the schools right now. What's something that you're really focused on, and what's something that you're really proud of, the work that you've been doing?
Something I'm really focused on right now is navigating the future, and that is all conversations surrounding anything and everything buildings. And how, if there's going to be any kind of shifting with students as far as grades, nothing is off the table right now. We are still, the Building Needs Task Force, of which I am also a member of, is still very much in talks as far as options. So if there are some options out there, please email us, because we're still very much listening. Something I'm proud of, I've never been on negotiations, and it looks like hopefully I'll be able to finish up with negotiations, which makes me really proud, because I'm happy to advocate for our amazing educators and staff. So I am in a union myself, and being able to be on the other side has brought a unique perspective, and I hope an ally, if you will.
With so much emotion, with when you're dealing with your children and the schools and what's going on, and you just said you're there and you're still listening. What else do you want people to know about the decision-making process and where things are, and what is it that you want people to know?
I always put the children's needs first, always. I also listen to all the stakeholders. I'm also, I pride myself on doing my own research as well as the research that's provided. I think just listening, parents want to be heard, community members want to be heard. And I think setting the tone for that is really important, and listening to people, even when, we don't always agree, or things are emotional as they have been. It's not an easy discussion to have. But I think at the end of the day, I pride myself on listening to everyone and hearing them.
Well, as the parent of a Falmouth High School graduate, and I know both Michael Kasparian and Troy, who are in the studio, are also parents of Falmouth High School graduates, I want to thank you for giving of your time to make our schools the best that they can be. So thank you, and good luck tonight.
Thanks very much for having me. Thank you.
And back to you, Troy and Michael.
Great, thank you. Yeah, wonderful. So that's interesting what Melissa talked about. Everything's on the table, listen. I think that message is really strong, and I think that's probably speaks to why she's, as what Debbie said, in second place right now. Yeah.
She has carried herself with distinction for a long time. The discussions have gotten pretty acrimonious in some circles lately as it relates to the school committee. Some members themselves have gotten acrimonious and walked out of meetings. But Melissa, I think, is a class act who, again, as some of the other folks we've talked about tonight, Michael, is doing it for the right reasons. And I think looks like she'll be successful tonight because people recognize that.
Yeah, I mean, proven track record. Nobody can deny that. She's been stable, looking forward, and I think she summed it up very well tonight in this interview with Deb. So we'll see how it goes.
So interesting, while we wait to see if we can get some more results from Michael Palmer, let's go back to the ballot question for a minute, because Dickie McAvoy raised an interesting issue that really didn't get a lot of discussion. And I discussed this briefly in one of my columns several weeks ago, but I too am an enthusiastic supporter of expanding the sewer. But something that didn't get a lot of discussion was that betterment and that 70-30 split.
Sure.
And I think it did catch some residents by surprise. And so I think Dickie McAvoy speaks to the need for deeper engagement with the community. And I'm hoping that this newly reconstituted board makes that effort to more deeply engage and invite people in to be part of the discussion and not speak to people.
Sure. No, and I think you're right. I mean, I know that's come across with a lot of people I've spoken to when they found out about the betterment portion of it, et cetera. But, I think from the perspective that if you're getting the benefit of, that new service is coming in, you're going to bear some of the costs. It's also offset by the fact that you're never going to have to replace a septic system, which could be $40,000, $50,000. So at the end of the day, it comes out in the wash. But you're right, it probably could have been spoken about a little bit more so people could really understand the overall impact.
One of the things we don't often talk about, Michael and I are always here in front of the camera, but we have an amazing group of both FCTV employees and volunteers behind the cameras in the studio. And they are actually in our ears giving us instructions on what's next so that we can bring you the most up-to-date information as soon as it's available. But while we were chatting, one of you folks said something and we didn't get it. So could you repeat that?
I didn't get it. Okay, we're going to go to a package.
We have another visit with voters and another package that we'll bring to you, and then hopefully we'll go back to Town Hall.
Okay.
The first ballot question was about Great Pond, and I think increasing the sewers in our town to save our ponds is a great thing.
I think it's the pond that's receiving the largest amount of nitrogen of all of the estuaries here in Falmouth, so I'm very excited at the prospect of that ballot question passing and seeing the sewer network expand into that area.
We definitely need to control our wastewater. Falmouth has 14 estuaries, which I believe is the most estuaries in any town on the East Coast.
Especially since I'm a landscaper and I work on a lot of projects with the Falmouth Conservation Commission, so I'm very sensitive to the pollution that's entering our different ponds and lakes and oceans from failed septic systems or improper sewage that's not treated. I know like the whole Mara Vista area has been really problematic, and it's a financially restrictive situation for some of our residents to be able to pay for hooking into the town sewage. That being said, the different bonds that are available will help lessen that financial burden. I think it's really, really, really important that we have town sewage in as much of Falmouth as possible. Look at like West Falmouth Harbor. That's just really taken a huge toll from pollutants entering into our precious resources. The other one with the outfall pipes, it's kind of gross to think about all the septic. I realize it's going into the ocean and there's millions and millions and millions of gallons of water that will dilute it, but we need to have better restrictions on what's going into our ocean.
It still seems to me that that it's a little incomplete, that the conversation going on in the paper for the past several months has shown that there's a lot of variation in how people think that this should be done. And it's sort of a permanent problem. My guess is that it is the right thing to do in that densely populated peninsula of Mara Vista, that other alternatives in the Mara Vista Peninsula probably wouldn't work. So I think that's good, but I also think that there are some considerations at the sewage treatment plant that haven't been really resolved very well. For instance, this idea that, well, whatever problems will turn up at the sewage treatment plant in terms of nitrogen loading the ponds around there will be fixed by an outfall pipe. And I'm not so sure we want to be pumping that much water out of our aquifer every day without a sense of, is this going to cause some real problems? Is there going to be subsidence of the ground? Is there going to be saltwater intrusion? And I don't think those questions have been answered.
The sewer thing is incredibly contentious, I know. I have followed every single side of it. I was part of the pilot urine diversion program. I'm on the board of the Falmouth Water Stewards. I sat in a million meetings about the pollution in West Falmouth Harbor. It's huge, and it's one of those things that should have been addressed easily 50 years ago. And so now basically our water quality is, I think in a lot of places like West Falmouth Harbor, it's like at 63% as opposed to 100%. I mean, we have severely degraded waters now, and we cannot keep letting people have septic tanks that they don't pump and we can't have septic tanks in places like Mara Vista that's really crowded and too close to the water. I mean, we really have to do whatever we can. So I think that includes sewering.
I believe in investing in sewer treatment and helping the environment, so I voted for that.
A lot of good thought and planning has gone into that. Amy Lowell knows what she's doing. We got to move that forward. At the same time, I would also love to see the urine diversion folks get a little more money and support.
And thanks again, not only to our FCTV folks for being out there and speaking to the public, but for members of the public for sharing their thoughts and really enriching this program, but our community with their dedication and their civic engagement. So we talked just before we went off, Michael, about the FCTV team and how they all come together to get this broadcast done. But on Election Day, in each of our precincts, there are people, dedicated people, wardens and poll workers that get up very, very early in the morning. They're there at 7 a.m. They're there before 7 a.m.
Sure.
because the polls open at 7.
Yeah, they are.
And they put in an amazing effort.
Yeah, and they're still there now, probably, right? Or just about. But you're right, and that's what this whole thing's all about. And many of them have been doing it for years and years. So let's take a look.
Hi, good morning. My name is Mary Banks. I'm the precinct warden here at Precinct 5 in North Falmouth. I've been working at the polls probably for 30 years, maybe as a warden since 20. I started off checking people in, and then I love the process and totally respect the process, so I continued to work. We're always looking for people. People come and go. People go on vacations. They can't work. But it's a great process to get involved in. Oh, we have sign-up sheets here, or people come up and ask me, and I take names down, or they take them at the town hall. Every race and vote is so important. We have big races this year, selectmen, school committee, and town meeting members. And in a small town, everything matters and every vote matters.
My job today here at Precinct 9 is I am the warden of this polling location. It entails keeping records. It entails individuals coming to exercise their right to vote, passing out ballots, making sure the ballots are received properly, any assistance that they might need, and just making it a good experience for the voters. This precinct started as a result of the 2000 census. So Precinct 9 was created out of a piece of Hatchville, and they needed to staff it. And the role of the clerk is that you need Democrats and Republicans to be part of it. I'm a lifelong member of the Democratic Town Committee, and they notified the town committee that they were looking for clerk and deputy clerk, clerk, warden, deputy warden for positions. And I told the head of the Democratic Council at the time that, you know, I'd be willing to do it. And so I was deputy warden, and the warden that was here originally stepped back. So I've been doing this, and I've been doing the early voting with the clerk since 2016. The key to who we are as a country has to do with exercising our rights. And the greatest right that we have is to vote. And we live in this town. We're here, you know, year-round. And what happens in this town affects each and every one of us. And today's election is for selectmen, it's for school committee, it's for your town meeting members, and this is local government at its best.
Hi, good morning. My name is Mary Banks.
So I heard from Mary twice. That's amazing work that they do, and we're very thankful and proud of the work they do.
We sure are. And of course, that Precinct 9 warden was Phyllis Day, who also served honorably for many years as our elected clerk of courts. So we are really fortunate here in Falmouth to have an amazing group of volunteers and civic-minded folks who get involved. I've worked in communities throughout Massachusetts, and I say it all the time. Falmouth is different. We really are very blessed to have a citizenry that's deeply engaged and passionate, and they come to vote, they volunteers, they staff our committees, and that's what really makes this community pretty special.
Absolutely. 2 degrees of separation, neighbors helping neighbors. It's a wonderful place. Really, really is. So.
Absolutely. So we hope to go back to Town Hall soon, but in the meantime, to give you the latest update that we have, the early voting results are in. Precinct 1 is in, and so in the lead in the 3-year term race for the select board, incumbent Doug Brown is at the top of the ticket, and coming not too far behind him is challenger Colin Reed, and then followed, we're not sure exactly how the bottom 2 break out, but Dickie McAvoy and James Morse. And so we'll have final results for you here as soon as they're available from Town Hall. On the school committee side, the 3 incumbents were all in the lead after early voting, although when Precinct 1 results came in, Margaret Souza topped the ticket, followed by challenger Jane Scarborough. So it looks like Michael, that's going to be a race that's perhaps tighter than we thought.
And, you know, I'm not surprised. Again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, you know, a lot of different ideas and a lot of hot topics, a lot of hot spots. And so I think that's a tough race to call. I don't think we can call that at all. And we'll see how that plays out through the end of the night.
I know that having followed all of the candidates and tried to teach myself about their attributes and their histories, Jane Scarborough is a constitutional lawyer, I believe. And so I suspect that those strong numbers in Precinct 1 may be a reaction to some of that acrimony that we talked about before, and people wanted someone who was perhaps more deliberative and thoughtful to get on that committee and moderate some of those difficult discussions.
Could very well be, yes.
So in each precinct as well, there are town meeting races. We have a local elected legislature here. In some communities in Massachusetts, those town meetings are wide open, and you can just come to town meeting. But we elect folks, and so you see those 9 precincts. And it's interesting, Phyllis Day was talking about the fact that Precinct 9, which you see right there in sort of the geographic center of town and encompasses a good portion of Hatchville, is oh, I like that. This is amazing work by our FCTV folks here. So Precinct 9 is the Coonamessett area, and so that precinct is the newest in town. And as Mike Palmer was alluding to earlier, when I first ran for office in 1992, there were only 7 precincts at the time. But with the population growth, there were 8 and then 9. And what's interesting, though, is so my first election goes back more than 30 years. That was 1992 when I lost that election. But the dynamics that we've talked about so many times on this show after decades still hold true. That for some reason, folks are more motivated in the Woods Hole and North Falmouth area to come to the polls, while the population density is greater in other parts of town.
Yeah, very peculiar.
But
Absolutely.
the turnout consistently doesn't match those parts of town. So those parts of town in Woods Hole and North Falmouth tend to determine who the successful candidates are going to be.
Yeah. It's very strange when you look at it from that perspective and look at this map, absolutely. Yeah, 1, 2, 5, and 6. But we'll see. There are candidates from eastern part of the town. We'll see if their neighbors and friends have come out to support them, if the issues are close to home. And again, particularly I think that school committee race is far from over, and we'll see how that plays out.
Absolutely. And let's just keep that map up there for a second, because I think it really demonstrates what we've been talking about. And so the greatest population density in town, when you talk about smaller lots, right there, Precinct 3, which is T-Ticket and Mara Vista, and then Precinct 4, which is the Davisville area, Central Ave, and it goes a little north of that into some parts of Wacoit, because a lot of that development in the 70s and 60s had those smaller lots. The density of people is much greater there. But yet, it's funny, you'd think the precincts are generally broken up so that there's an equal amount of people in them. That's how they're drawn.
Sure.
But you would think that because of that density, you'd see greater turnout. And I certainly haven't figured out the secret sauce and what it is to get people from that end to show up. When I first got elected, I was living in Falmouth Heights. I grew up in East Falmouth in Precinct 4 and then lived for 20 years in Precinct 5. I now live in Precinct 6. I've been sort of a vagabond. I think I've lived in every precinct in town other than Precinct 1.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, the other thing that's always been interesting to me since I've moved here, speaking about precincts and all, when you go to other towns, like, again, I go back to, of course, where I grew up, when it came to, of course, we had a city council, not a board of selectmen, but still it was representative. But there were races in each precinct. So every precinct had an elected member or two, or whatever the number was. So it was an even amount, then you had members at large. So I always found it very interesting here in Falmouth that you could have precincts that were completely left out on representation on the Board of Selectmen, that you could have Board of Selectmen from 2, maybe even 3 precincts when you have 9 precincts. So I always have found that to be really fascinating.
So you raise an excellent issue, and you remember a few years ago, the town clerk, Michael Palmer, and Barb Schneider and I and some others actually sponsored a discussion about that very concept, to look at whether or not our current form of government had lived its useful life, and we should consider something that's more of a representative form of government. I have worked in a representative government in Bridgewater where that's the case, that each precinct elects a person to the legislative body. In this case, it's a town council. And then there's also some at-large folks. There are people who believe that provides more direct access for citizens, and you have that precinct representative that can represent your interests and the interest of their neighborhood.
Yeah.
It is more of a city form of government. It's what I currently work in Brockton now, and I at least find that gives people a direct link and accessibility.
Well, it certainly does. I think even when you look at it from the perspective of the town meeting members, 243 town meeting members, 241 elected, both members of the general court have a seat as well. But when we go to town meeting, as you know, usually on the first night, we have a quorum, but it's like just around 200. And then as it goes on, it kind of goes less and less. And so it is interesting how, a precinct can lose some representation as the warrant goes on, if it goes into multiple nights, and is everybody really equally represented?
Absolutely, and the clerk talked about a similar dynamic in one of his interviews, that there are historically precincts here in town that struggle to get a full complement of candidates for town meeting.
Right, and other precincts where people keep running for re-election. I always thought that was an interesting thing. We talk about term limits, of course you hear a lot about that in Congress and the Senate and everything. I'm curious as to your thoughts on, do you think that would even make sense at the town meeting level?
I think that there are town meeting members who have served honorably for decades and decades. And sometimes folks may hang on a little too long. But I think the issue is the question of whether or not town meeting itself has hung on too long. Extremely complex issues, multi-tens of millions of dollars of infrastructure investments. And we ask a lot of town meeting members to come 3, maybe 2, maybe 1 night a year.
Right, absolutely.
To get educated on those nuances. And I think it's a lot to ask. So I've stated this publicly many times. I think it's time really to take a look at how we're governed, and whether or not a more representative form of government would in fact be more responsive to the people it serves.
Well, no question. I think in everything, whether it's what Melissa Keefe spoke about earlier, about looking at everything, buildings, population, same thing with any form of government. We have to always be self-assessing, open to different ideas, and see if it makes more sense. Of course, it was a very charming and wonderful form of government and made a lot of sense. I know that the population in the town has grown up to 33,000 full-time members fairly rapidly. When I hear a lot of people talk about, when there were 7,500 people in town, 8,000 people in town, but now when you get to these complex issues, more and more people who are retiring here, if you look at the 33,000 people, how many of them are retired? Come from other communities, have different ideas, have had a lot of different experiences, different needs. And again, it's very difficult to get people who are, in different stages in their lives to agree on what's important, particularly when it comes to school, density, costs for wastewater, big issues. At the very least, I think it's always worth the conversation being open and people being heard, and letting the citizenry come out, and it'd be very interesting to hear what they have to say.
No question. So I know, having had conversations with the candidates for select board and several of the incumbents, I know that there's an openness to at least having discussions like this, whereas in the past, they've kind of been shut down. And that's too bad, because it's the people that we serve, it's the people that deserve to be heard. And it's kind of funny, as we wait, we have 2 more precincts to come in, and as soon as those 2 precincts are in, we'll bring you those results live. But it's almost as though the FCTV audience is sitting with us at breakfast, because Michael and I actually join
Yes.
each other at least once a month for breakfast, usually
Right.
at the Talk of the Town in North Falmouth, and we talk about these very issues, and we usually will have folks that will come and join us.
Right.
Bob
Absolutely.
Mascali from the Select Board once in a while. So we're glad to invite you into our camaraderie and our discussion about this town
Well,
we
you
love
know,
so much.
it's just an extension. These conversations, having a community television station that brings these issues out, not just election night, but during programs and packages, having our own community newspaper, our own town newspaper, where people are free to express their thoughts and different ideas. It's really an amazing thing, you know. And again, there's no easy solution. Going to a different form of government would also bring other challenges. You know, there are problems with everything, but again, it's always a good thing to talk about the future, how we can best adjust the future. And I think, you know, as Melissa Keith talked about, it's always about the children. You know, at this level, it's going to always be about the citizens. You know, that's what makes this community so great, is people really care about Falmouth and really what's best for Falmouth.
So true. Here's the beauty of live TV. I'm going to listen in my ear. Did I hear that we're ready to go back to Town Hall?
Okay,
Okay,
great.
pardon that awkward silence for our viewers, but we, what we just heard is that those precincts are coming in now, so in a few minutes we will have, you will have live here, first, right here on FCTV, the unofficial but almost final results from the 2025 Falmouth Town election. So, Michael, the early front runners, as we've said a few times now, but if you're just tuning in now for results, we can tell you that early voting results are in. Doug Brown and Colin Reed are in the lead for the race for the select board. The 3 incumbents and early for the school committee were in the lead with early voting, but precinct 1 came in, and Jane Scarborough, one of the challengers, was second on the ticket, so that's a really close race. So we do plan on having final results for you in a minute. While we have the school committee folks up there, we were talking about the fact that a couple of those candidates ran together. The last time I saw that was in 2002, when my dear late friend Pat Flynn and Ahmed Mustafa, who's probably watching tonight, both of whom served honorably on the board, but they kind of ran in tandem for the select
Tag
board
team
that
there,
year.
huh? Yeah.
One of them, Pat Flynn, was not successful.
Ah.
Pat actually lost a re-election and then came back on the board after. And when we do these, I often think of Pat and Virginia Valley Ayler and Nate Ellis and some of those long-standing elected officials that are no longer with us, but really raised the bar for all of us for service.
Yeah, in fact, when I first moved here to Falmouth back in 2005, Pat Flynn was on the select board. And I remember meeting her acquaintance at that time, and yeah, a lot of change, and I've only been here a short timer, being the Washashore that I am, but still, I've seen a lot, learned a lot, particularly in my role as president of the chamber, and know that we have a citizenry that demands excellence, that wants answers, but also are willing to work together and cooperate. So I really believe at the end of the day today, whatever the results will be, those who are successful, you know, ran for the right reasons and are going to pursue the course of action that they feel is best. And hopefully people are going to be informed, continue to stay informed, and support our candidates and our winners as we try to all move forward.
You're absolutely right. And for those candidates who were not successful tonight, please stay involved and please stay engaged. It's so important. You know, in my speech before the chamber, when I was honored to receive the Citizen of the Year Award in 2024, I talked about gap fillers, right? People in our community, whenever there's a gap, no matter what it is, people come together and they fill it. They form a nonprofit or they raise money. And so they really just come together to fill those gaps in our community. And so there's space, even for the candidates that were not successful tonight, to fill some of those gaps and fill some of those spaces.
Well, I mean, you're a perfect example. You know, your first election, you didn't win. It didn't stop you. You ran again. And so there's room at the table for everybody. And what's really neat about this year was we had, you know, multiple candidates running for limited seats. And again, it pushed the conversation. It gave people something to think about and different directions and ideas, and we all benefit from that. So it's incumbent upon us all to support the winners and, again, move forward together.
Absolutely. So as we wait for those final results to come in, those final tabulations, we do have one final package where we'll learn a little bit about how the votes are tabulated.
Can you explain how the votes are tabulated in Falmouth to the constituents from the time a voter fills out their ballot to the time the official results are posted?
Okay, so as has always happened over history, you can show up on election day, you give the election worker your name, and they check you off the voting list, and you're presented a ballot. You take that ballot to the voting booth, and you mark that ballot, and you bring it over to a tabulator that's at each precinct. The vote goes through the tabulator, it captures the results of that ballot, and it saves them on memory cards. At the end of the night, when we close out that election in each precinct, those memory cards come back to Town Hall and they were uploaded to consolidate the results from each of the 9 precincts in the town of Falmouth, and then we come out with town-wide results. With the onset of early voting, it changed that landscape a little bit. Now people are able to vote by mail, and they also can vote in person. So we have two different ways of voting besides just showing up on the polls. So those ballots can't be calculated, can't be totaled up until election night at 8 o'clock. We can pre-tabulate them, but the results cannot be given out until the election night. So as these ballots come in from early voting by mail and early voting in person, a couple of times a week prior to the election, we're able to extract the ballot from the envelope that is returned to us in. We're checking them off the voting list again, and then we're running them through a high-speed tabulator, which is different from the tabulators you see at the precincts. Those tabulators, the precincts, you don't really need a high speed. They process a ballot and it takes about 8 seconds per ballot, where this high-speed tabulator can do about 100 a minute. So we're processing ballots through the high-speed tabulator that's saved to a file. Those files for all 9 precincts are saved and then uploaded on election night at 8 o'clock with the results coming back from the precincts.
You know, it's amazing how the early voting has changed things and how more and more people taking advantage of that. And going forward, I bet those numbers are just going to increase.
It's really a good way to encourage people to get to the polls around their schedule. I think government today more and more is about meeting people where they're at. Things have changed. Technology has changed. People's schedules have changed.
Absolutely.
And I think for me, early voting is what we talked about a few minutes ago with the select board, reaching out and engaging people and
Certainly.
trying to get people to be involved.
Yeah, and the easier you make it for people, the higher percentage people are going to vote, the better representation. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Little known fact, we've seen Town Clerk Michael Palmer. He's sort of been the guest star on this broadcast tonight. And
rock star.
He's been town clerk for 22 years. But before that, his hobby was actually running political campaigns. And so he was born and raised in Falmouth and moved to Barnstable for a little while, but then moved back to Falmouth and ran campaigns. In fact, Michael Palmer and his first wife Nancy ran my first couple of campaigns, and I think we might have an interview with Michael Palmer to talk about that.
I was at a political function in the late 1990s, and everyone they were pretty old. They were all in their 60s and 70s, and this young gentleman happened to be there, and I was young myself at the time, and I walked over to him, because he was young. I wanted to welcome him to the committee and welcome him to the function, and I explained to him that I ran campaigns, and if he was ever interested in running for a political office, that he should come and just talk to me, and I can point him in the right direction. The very next morning, there was a gentleman, the same gentleman was knocking on my back door, and he walked in and said, I'm Troy Clarkson, and I want to run for selectman. So that was the start of his career, and at the time he was the youngest selectman. He didn't actually win the first time, but the second time he did win, and he was the youngest selectman, they call it the select board, but a member of the select board until this election, when we have Jack Richardson, who is on the ballot, which will take over that title from Troy Clarkson.
It's like real fate for him, huh? Wow. You
Yes.
think he rused that day, or he, I don't know.
Well, I am blessed to call Michael a dear friend,
Yeah.
and so I think we kid each other, but we're both grateful for that day. And speaking once again of our town clerk, we will be back to Town Hall in just a minute or so, where Debbie and Michael will join us, and we'll bring you those results live. So it's, as always, Michael, been great to be on this show with you, bringing live results to the people here in Falmouth, and really being able to showcase the health and the depth of the democratic process here in Falmouth.
Well, it's a real pleasure for me to be involved, and it helps keep me informed. And during the course of the year, you hear about these issues. We participate through town meeting, but it all comes together. So the rubber hits the road on election night. So, always filled with hope that we're going to move forward. We're going to tackle the tough issues, and again, I think citizens of Falmouth come through together, and I look forward to next year.
Yes, as always, we will always be here. If it's election night, it's FCTV with Troy Clarkson and Michael Kasparian. So any moment now, we'll be taking you over to Town Hall for those live results. Anything we didn't cover tonight that you wanted to talk about?
We covered an awful lot. I don't know. Kind of interesting at the 250th anniversary of the country and the kickoff events here in town. It's interesting when we think back about, that whole, revolution that was fought and everything and brought us to this point, and that it lives on. Democracy lives on. It's living today through this whole process. So it just feels good, doesn't it?
Did you ever catch a glimpse of the cannonball in the bathroom at the Nimrod?
I actually did, believe it or not. Yes, way back when I first moved here with that little trap door that was in the toilet.
Yes.
In the men's room. Yeah. And in fact, I'll tell you a funny story. We were in there and some guy brought his children in, girls too, and he goes, "Oh, excuse me, I want to look at the cannonball." I'm like, "What cannonball?" They told me, and that's how I learned about it. Interesting.
So for those folks that may be newer to town that hadn't heard that legend, there was a restaurant on Dillingham Ave called the Nimrod, and it was the HMS Nimrod that during the War of 1812 actually fired cannonballs on the town of Falmouth.
Right.
I think in 1814, if I'm not mistaken. And so the Nimrod, in a trap door in the bathroom, you could see one of those cannonballs.
Now, it wasn't in that location originally, that building, was it?
No.
No, it was
No.
closer to the
It was closer to the water,
harbor,
right.
and
Yeah,
then it was
absolutely.
moved, but that was kept with that little trap door. So we got a lot of history here in Falmouth, pretty amazing. Yeah, going way back, so, yeah.
Absolutely.
Beginning of the country.
So as we await results, as we await results here, we do have one more package. The folks here at FCTV were throughout the community today, just speaking to people about the issues and about voting. And so we'll go to that one more time before we get back to Town Hall.
When voting, what are some of the most important issues you consider when selecting a candidate?
So the way that I pick a candidate is that it's the folks that I grew up with, people I went to high school with that are now selectmen or candidates, and I kind of know they have an allegiance to the town.
For me, it's understanding the issues in a small town.
I think it's time to put younger people in charge of things because older people just don't seem to be doing the job.
Their honesty and their integrity.
Well, certainly their experience and their willingness to listen, to compromise when necessary, and just to educate themselves on issues that they may not know right off the top.
I think some of the most important issues in the town of Falmouth today, of course, are the school committee vote, and also making sure we have candidates across all boards and offices that are invested. The environment is very important to me as well, and the land that we have here and our water and how we're taking care and protecting those things.
Their support for affordable housing is topmost when I'm thinking of what the town needs supporters for. And also I work in conservation, so open space conservation, really important.
I actually try to get to know in person the candidates, which in fact I do.
The big issue that I'm thinking about this year is, candidates that support improvement of the water quality in our estuaries.
Why is voting important?
Particularly in light of what's going on in Washington. A lot more burden's going to fall here, and I want to make sure we got the right people in charge.
We can vote for anybody in D.C., but real democracy starts here.
I think my generation, and I'm a lot older than most here, it's always been important. I've seen the difference it made through some, different presidential elections and how countries can shift and how small towns can shift. And I think it's vital, no matter what, to just get out and vote.
Just look at the last election, presidential election I'm talking about. That'll tell you everything you need to know about how important it is to vote and research what you're voting for. Don't just listen to sound bites on television.
Well, we can't complain if we don't come out and vote and let people know how we feel about certain issues. So if we're going to complain, and people love to complain, you've got to be able to go to vote and make your positions heard.
Voting's important because we live in a country that's premised, I think, very well on the idea that people can govern themselves. And if we don't participate in that process, what's the point? And I happen to feel that local politics is where people can really make a difference.
Great.
Once again,
those folks,
some fantastic folks out there in the community. Of course, one of the guests during that package, Michael, was a member of the Select Board, Bob Mascali. And I think Bob represents that beautiful melting pot that is Falmouth. Bob came here from New York after a successful legal career less than 20 years ago and got right into it and started volunteering and got engaged. And he really represents some of the finest we have and people that may not be from here but become here. And that's really important.
Absolutely. I've had the pleasure of working with him for a long time, even before he was a select board member. But he's always curious, interested, asks me, hey, what about your members? What about the business community, the larger community? What do you think? It's great. He likes to listen, exactly what he talked about on there, being able to listen, being able to compromise. He's proven that in his time on the select board. And so, that's leadership. That's leadership at work right there. It's pretty amazing.
Indeed. The one thing on the ballot we didn't talk about tonight, and really didn't get a lot of play in the community at all, was the non-binding question 2. And there it is up on your screen.
Right.
direct the town to urge the Commonwealth to stop Holtec from releasing radioactive and chemical pollutants from the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station. And we're not going to get a chance to discuss it because we are going to go to Town Hall to Debbie Rogers and Town Clerk Michael Palmer for live results. Debbie.
We are very pleased to be back here live at Town Hall with results. Thank you, Michael. I know it's been a very busy night.
Yeah, it's always kind of hectic at the end of the night, and when things don't go exactly smooth as it should, it pushes the results a little bit later. It's actually not that late. Yeah, some of the other elections, it even gets pushed later in this federal election. But we do have some results if we want to get into that.
Please.
So for the select board, it looks like Doug Brown is being returned with 45,481 with a new select person, Colin Reed, with 3,005 votes. Also joining on that select board is Jack Richardson, who ran unopposed. For the school committee, it looks like the incumbents are being were reelected. All had, Melissa Keefe with 2,975 and Michael Halen, actually Margaret Souza with 2,901 and Michael Halen with 2,594. And I think I'm reading that correct, am I not? Yep, okay. And the only other contested question on the ballots, which were of interest to everyone, was the precinct, question 1, which was the sewer question, and that passed by almost a 4-to-1 ratio. It was 4,021 to 15,001, and the non-binding question also passed quite heavily, 5,011 to 573. So those are the results that everyone was interested in hearing, and we'll be analyzing them as we go along. But I haven't had time to digest them myself yet.
Thank you, Michael.
All right.
Appreciate your time. So just to give you some numbers here on the select board, we had Colin Reed at 3,005 votes. James Morse, 1,309 votes. Doug Brown, 4,481 votes. And Richard McAvoy had 1,705 votes. Of course, Jack Richardson came in winning the one-year select board seat with 4,540 votes. And congratulations to our town clerk, Michael Palmer, for his 4,975 votes. On the library trustees, we have Mary Buckley with 4,511 votes and Judith Hanley with 4,242 votes. Planning board, 3 years, Thomas Zine, 4,241 votes, and Pat Kerfoot with 4,258 votes. The one-year planning board, Paul Dreyer with 4,217 votes. On the school committee, Michael Halen, 2,594 votes. Margaret Souza, 2,901 votes. Jane Scarborough, 2,402 votes. Sarah Bogdan, 2,408 votes. And Melissa Keefe, 2,975 votes. And Amanda McGonigal, 2,541. The Municipal Light Board, 3 years, Roger McDonald, 4,184 votes. And the Municipal Light Board 1 year, Eric Gallimore, 4,104 votes. And then we had write-ins for the Falmouth Housing Authority. On the precinct, on the town meeting members, we will have that available on FCTV Channel 6. We will also have that available on our website at fctv.org. Do you have any questions for me from there? I can go over to the 2 questions real quick and give you those numbers. Sorry, trying to get the mic and the papers. On the ballot questions, question 1, yes, 4,021. No, 1,501. And on question 2, the non-binding question, yes, 5,011. No, 573. I'm not hearing you, but those are the results here from Town Hall.
Thank you so much, Debbie. We really appreciate it. We appreciate the hard work, as we said, of Town Clerk Michael Palmer and his staff.
Not a big surprise. What we were talking about earlier, if you look at the results, particularly that school committee race, everyone earned over 2,000 votes. From the top vote to I think the top vote was 2,900 something, and the lowest vote was 2,400, somewhere in that range. So there wasn't a lot of margin of error, margin of difference there. So I think it really shows that people were paying attention and had very different ideas about moving forward. So my hope would be, that the incumbents that won re-election, congratulations to them. They're going to be open to those people that challenge them, listen to their ideas, and try to, bring the community together on behalf of the students and the school committee.
Absolutely, and the same goes for the select board race, although you're right, Michael, those margins were not nearly as close. So to recap that, Doug Brown with 4,481, Colin Reed 3,005, Dickie McAvoy 1,705, and Jim Morse 1,309. And so a pretty comfortable victory for the incumbent Doug Brown and the challenger Colin Reed. But you're right, a much closer vote on the school committee, and I think that shows the level of engagement that people had in that race and the fact that they were paying attention.
Well, at the very least, I think what it does is it really shows that the conversation's still on the table, people are paying attention, and that even though those people who were not successful in achieving those seats, talked about concerns that people had. And again, I think that going forward, people will work together, listen to each other, and it'll all be for the benefit of our students' schools. And new select board coming in, I'm looking forward to working with them in my role as the president of the chamber, and I see good things ahead for Falmouth. I think it's going to be amazing.
Absolutely. So congratulations to all of the victorious candidates. Equal congratulations to those who were not successful, with our thanks and gratitude for putting your name out there and caring enough to get involved. So if it's election night, it's FCTV here in Falmouth.
That's right. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure to be part of it.
Yes.
This is Michael Kasparian. I am Troy Clarkson. It's been our honor to share some time with you here in Falmouth on election night. We'll see you soon.
Make it a great night.